Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the spectacular youngster, Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. What's going on today, buddy?
A lot of listening to Super Bowl talk today as we record this. As our fans know, we record this on Mondays, and so this is the Monday directly after the Super Bowl. Who knows when you're listening to this, but as long as you're hearing this, I guess you're listening to this. So not sure what day it is when you're listening to this, but we're recording this the day after the Super Bowl. So for me, it's been a Super Bowl-filled morning talking to Montreal radio, as I always do on Mondays. But otherwise, high school sports reporting in Wisconsin, even though I lived down in Jacksonville, Florida. I do that remotely still. But, yeah, just chilling, listening to football talk, formulating my thoughts, finalizing my thoughts, I guess. We do a number of shows, Troy, and football-geared shows in general. We always talk about the NFL, it seems like, at some point in some show during the week. So just interesting stuff last night with the Super Bowl, obviously, but we're not talking about the Super Bowl in this show because this show is about the Big Ten, and basketball is basically what is going on in terms of the Big Ten world. National Signing Day, I must say, though, before I kick it back to you, Troy. National Signing Day for college football is Wednesday this week, February 7th, I believe that is, Wednesday. Yes, so that's something to look for as a Big Ten fan, something to keep an eye on, who your team gets, who could possibly decommit. But this year's National Signing Day will honestly be the worst signing day of all.
That's because they had the early signing period.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not going to be a ton of action. This isn't as much hoopla.
Yeah, this isn't as much hoopla as it used to be.
Right.
So you're going to pick up those guys that maybe wanted to wait a little bit, get another official visit in, do some of those things. But yeah, to be honest, I'm not even really amped up for Wednesday.
No.
Because it's like, okay, well, you had early signing period. Now you're going to have the, and I air quote, official National Signing Day. Who cares? There we go. Put a date on it. But, yeah, I'm not overly excited about Wednesday as far as that goes because of the early signing period. But you're right. No Super Bowl talk today. This is all Big Ten basketball. And I'll tell you what, Kevin, we were talking about in our pregame. We talked about teams having to separate themselves if they want to get into the big dance. And it's starting to happen. We're starting to see it right in front of our eyes in the Big Ten. The best thing about the Super Bowl, Kevin, you know what that is to me? That means March Madness is not even a month away. There's only 6 games. Some teams have 7 conference games left. Most teams have 6 left. But when we look at today's show and we go over the teams, there's teams that have put their foot down and said, we want in. There's other teams that are putting their foot on the accelerator, but it's like they have some engine problems and they're not quite getting there. And then there's others that are just on the side of the road with flat tires. They're done. They're out. They've called AAA. They're done, over, kaput. Before we get into Big Ten talk, though, as always, going to turn it back over to you. We're going to go over the AP Top 25. Big Ten standings, then we're going to get more in depth on a couple of topics in the Big Ten. Take it away, youngster.
Yeah, so the AP Top 25, and I kind of always joke every week, it's week 14 of the college basketball season. Whatever that means to you, it doesn't mean anything to me, but that's what it's labeled as. These are the week 14 rankings going in to the week of January 5th, 2018, or January 5th, February 5th, as I messed that up. So top 25 stuff. We've got, actually, hold on one second. I did not bring it up correctly. There we go. Villanova, sitting at number 1 still, 22-1. They just keep winning. Virginia, 22-1 at number 2. They just keep winning. And then we get into Big Ten stuff. Purdue, 23-2. They just keep winning. They have won 19 straight games now. After starting 4-2, they're still number 3 in the country, still have 1 first-place vote. Number 4 is 22-3 Michigan State. They do not have a first-place vote. Every first-place vote either goes to Villanova or Virginia, or Purdue has 1. But we've talked about on the show that arguably if March Madness started today, we might pick Purdue to win the whole thing. right now, but Michigan State's starting to come along as well. They've won, I think it's 5, 6 straight now. So Michigan State at number 4, and then you've got teams like Xavier, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, Auburn. To me, I mean, I guess to gear away from the Big Ten for a second, I think if there's going to be a year where it's like, hey, this 15 seed could be the 2 seed, which I always look for because that's always an actual possibility. 16-1, a little obscure, but 15s over 2s, it's happened before. And it seems like it's happening more often now. But so if there is a crazy upset like that to happen, if there are a couple number 12 seeds to make it to the Elite Eight or one of them makes it to the Final Four, I feel like this might be that year because it seems like Virginia even, who have been number 2 for a long time now, they're susceptible. We talked about Virginia a week ago that as long as you put up like 60 points, you're going to have a decent shot at beating Virginia. Villanova is a juggernaut, but they're not obscenely, this year's Villanova team, for example, is not as good as the one that won the title before. So I don't think they're this head and shoulders number 1 overarching team. Purdue's really good, but even as of late, and we're going to talk about that more in a bit, even as of late, Purdue's been somewhat struggling a little bit despite getting wins. Michigan State, have they really put it together? And then again, your number 1, 2 seed would be Xavier, 21-3. I mean, you got a couple nice players there, but that's your best number 2 seed. Cincinnati plays good defense, but they always struggle offensively. That's not a 2 seed I trust. Texas Tech, I would need to do full research on what Texas Tech is. Auburn, you need to do full research on what Auburn is. Those are your 2 seeds. And then you got teams like Duke, Kansas, who Duke needs to put things together. Kansas at number 10 would be a 3 seed. They're 18-5. They might not even win the Big 12 for the first time in a bajillion years. And then you got teams like St. Mary's. Gonzaga isn't Gonzaga from last year. They're not a juggernaut. Arizona struggled. Then you get Ohio State at 14. I just think there's a lot of teams that it's like, yeah, these teams are good, but they're not that great. And I think every year in March Madness, you've got really a couple favorites, and then you've got like 6 or 7 other teams that it's like, yeah, I could see them winning the whole thing if they get hot. This year, though, it's like Villanova's really good. They're not a juggernaut. Purdue's really good. I think they're beatable. Michigan State's obviously beatable. Duke's obviously beatable. They just lost to a team that had lost like 11 straight games at St. John's over the weekend. That was atrocious. There just seems to be a lot of shaky teams, and teams like Xavier, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, Auburn, as 2 seeds. I think this March Madness could be one of those where there could be a lot of craziness to happen. We're still, a month plus away from the actual tournament starting, but I think this one could be a good one. To go back to the top 25, though, finally, again, Purdue's number 3, Michigan State 4, and Ohio State moved up to 14. Michigan moved up to 20. That's it as far as the Big Ten is concerned, although for the first time, I believe, others receiving votes, Nebraska is in there. Nebraska is creeping toward the top 25 in basketball, which I can't remember my entire lifetime, Nebraska being a top 25 basketball team. I can't really remember the last time Nebraska even made the NCAA tournament, to be honest with you. That's something I'd have to look up, but they're starting to get a little love, and they're still hanging in the top 5 of this conference, right next to Michigan. You could say tied for 4th, realistically. But so that's the top 25, this week's top 25. Purdue 3, Michigan State 4, Ohio State 14, Michigan 20, and then Nebraska's looking in, getting some votes.
Yes, youngster, there we go. It's basically the same teams we've talked about, and Michigan separating themselves into that second tier, and Nebraska. Honestly, Nebraska doing what they need to do. I had mentioned last week on the show, I need to see Nebraska do something and get a win that is worthy of me saying they're a tournament team. I know Wisconsin sucks this year. They're terrible. But they went to Wisconsin and won. It's a hard place to win no matter how bad Wisconsin is. Go into the Kohl Center and basically taking care of business. To me, that was the win. Now I look at Nebraska at 5th, and you look at their record and you look at their remaining schedule, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I think Nebraska is a tournament team. So I think you've got 5. I think you've got 5 teams, and unless the wheels fall off the bus, I think Nebraska, Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan State are pretty well set as long as they continue doing what they're doing. And then you and I are going to talk a little bit later about the other teams that are in this conference. But I think those 5, the 4 in the top 25, Nebraska receiving votes, as long as nothing dramatic happens here at the end and they just keep taking care of business, I think you got 5 Big Ten teams in for sure. We'll talk and see if anybody else can creep their way up. But let's get to the Big Ten standings there, youngster.
Yeah, so sitting atop the conference, to nobody's surprise, is Purdue. Like I said, they've won 19 straight games now. They're 12-0 in the Big Ten, 6 to go. If there was a Big Ten team who was going to go undefeated in conference play this year, I think Troy and I both would have said Michigan State. They've lost a couple games earlier in the Big Ten season. They've won 6 straight. But so they're starting to right the ship. But Purdue, 12-0, 23-2 overall. They're looking like a 1 seed, and if they win the Big Ten tournament, they're absolutely going to be a 1 seed. It would be one thing if they lost another couple games and then lost in the Big Ten tournament somewhere. Then maybe they get shafted and get a 2 seed. But they're still just putting together wins. We're going to talk about Purdue a little bit more in a second. Not go too in depth, but they've been shaky a little bit as of late, in my opinion, but still number 1, still winning games. Ohio State number 2. I said coming into this week about a month ago, Troy, that I thought Ohio State would be 20-5 overall, 11-1 in conference, and here they are going into this week where Ohio State, what do they have in front of them? Ohio State has to play at Purdue on Wednesday. So that's obviously the monster game for Ohio State, and I said I expect 20-5. I guess according to Vegas, they were supposed to win out as of a month ago, basically, because their schedule was pretty light going into this Purdue game. But I figured they'd slip up somewhere. They did. They're still 20-5, 11-1, number 2 in the Big Ten, and we're going to get that clash of Purdue Ohio State this week. We're also going to get Purdue Michigan State this weekend. So huge games involving Purdue this week to look for, but those are your top 3. Purdue number 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan State at 3 at 10-2 in conference. And then you've got this little tier rounding out the top 5, in my opinion, that sort of separated themselves from the rest. That next tier, so to say, that we've kind of been looking for. Michigan 19-6 overall, 8-4 in the conference. They've won 2 games this past week, lost none. They're number 4, and then Nebraska also at number 5, I guess, also at 8-4 in conference, 17-8 overall, 1-0 this past week. And then jumping into the middle of the conference is Penn State at 6-6, Northwestern number 7 at 5-6, Maryland at number 8, 5-7, Indiana number 9. They've fallen off a cliff, 5-7 as well. And then you've got basically the bottom where you've got no shot in making the NCAA tournament unless you win
the Big Ten tires
title. Yeah.
Call them the flat tires.
Yeah. These teams have to win the Big Ten title, absolutely, or you're not getting in. Minnesota at 3-9, Iowa number 11 at 3-9, Wisconsin number 12 at 3-9, Illinois number 13 at 2-9, and then Rutgers leading up the rear at 2-10. That's the rest of the conference, but that middle tier we're going to talk about in a bit here, but going to start with Purdue. But so, yeah, Purdue at the top, Ohio State, Michigan State also near the top, Michigan, Nebraska formulating, rounding out the top 5. And then you got some interesting teams, Penn State, Northwestern, Maryland, Indiana. I kind of group in there because they still have a shot. It's just a very long shot for them to get in the tournament. But that's the Big Ten standings. Not a ton is changing. Northwestern's creeping their way up. Nebraska, Michigan kind of solidifying themselves, like you said, Troy. And then past Indiana, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Rutgers, they're basically done.
Yeah. You know, I'm looking from last week to this week, and you mentioned it, Penn State and Northwestern. A couple of weeks ago, they were near that double-digit standing place. Actually, I think wasn't Northwestern 11th 2 weeks ago, Kevin, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I believe so.
They've got a good veteran team. And I don't know, like I had said before on a previous show, maybe they just thought it was going to be easy this year after getting there last year. And again, in the Big Ten, doesn't matter what the records are. Even Rutgers pulls off a win or two. Illinois gets a win or two. Iowa gets a win or two. Heck, even my Badgers have 3 wins.
Right.
So, you have to go out and play. And if you go out and are not mentally prepared, one of those bottom dweller flat tires are going to beat you. And that's what happened to Northwestern. They went out, and I think they were just not emotionally tied into it. Again, I'm not in the locker room, but it's just the way they were playing. It's like, is this really the same Northwestern team? Because basically it is the same Northwestern team as last year. Yeah. And I watched them play, and it's like they're nowhere near what they were doing last year. And to me, as a former coach, I'm thinking a lot of this has to just be mental. It's not like they got that bad from one year to the next.
Right.
What it comes down to is, and I don't want to say the word lazy, it's just you sometimes get overconfident. And I think that's where Northwestern was. Then all of a sudden they put themselves slightly behind the 8 ball, and they're still slightly behind the 8 ball. They've got to work their butt off to get into the NCAA tournament, but I think it clicked to them. Like, holy cow, we've got to actually go out and play hard every night. So hats off to them, though, for creeping their way back up, but it may be a little bit too late because we're going to go over their schedule, at least I am, on their chances of making the NCAA tournament. And Penn State, this is the team. This is the team, Kevin, you and I had as a sleeper team to make the NCAA tournament. It's about where I thought they'd be. I thought they'd be around 500 in the conference. And now can they finish it off here in their final 6 games? They probably have to go 4-2. And we'll talk about, can they go 4-2? 10-8, that will put them on the bubble. I don't know if they can go 5-1. 5-1 might really be pushing the envelope. But 4-2 will give them a legitimate chance, at least in the committee's eyes. And if they can do something in the Big Ten tournament, maybe that would be enough. But I like what Penn State is doing. This is the team you and I thought would have a legitimate shot at getting in the NCAA tournament this year, and now they've at least put themselves on the right highway to get there. I'm doing a lot of car references today, if you can't tell, youngster, because as I told you before the show, and I guess I'll get off basketball, those that listen in every week probably know that I've had nothing but car problems for the last, Kevin, 2 months? I know your car burned up, but I've been having car problems. You know this. And now today, brake light comes on, brakes are grinding, my steering wheel is shimmying. It's crazy. I am having nothing but major car problems. So anybody that owns a car dealership or does marketing for a car dealership and wants to sponsor a show, this is the one. Sponsor us. We need a sponsor, and the old man needs a car. I literally need a car, youngster. I am tired of dealing with these problems. But anyway, getting back, I know you want to talk about Purdue. They were looking like going to put our foot on your throat team for a while. And like you said, lately, they're looking human, but they're still getting wins. 19 in a row, Kevin. 19 in a row. That is one heck of a run right now.
Yeah. To win 19 straight games, no matter the conference, no matter the sport, it's impressive to go out and do your thing 19 straight games and come out with a victory, whether you're the more talented team or not. It's impressive. And I just wanted to highlight, I guess, the last 4 for this team. The last 4 games, 4 games ago, they beat Michigan by 4 points. They allowed 88. 3 games ago, went to Indiana, won by 7. 2 games ago, so this past week, they hosted Maryland, won that game by 8. And then on Saturday, they were pretty much blowing out Rutgers at Rutgers. And then Rutgers started creeping back in, got it to within 1 point in the second half, and Purdue escaped with a 78-76 victory. I mean, that's this top of the tier. What Troy and I have been saying for the last month arguably the best team in college basketball, was very close to losing to the worst team in the Big Ten, as many people would see it. So, yeah, it perfectly goes to your point that, I mean, one three-pointer goes in for Rutgers, and you can say, boom, upset happened, arguably worst team in the Big Ten beats the best team in the country. I mean, so I don't know if that speaks to how kind of on a downslide Purdue is. I don't know if that speaks to how formidable the Big Ten is as a conference, even though they are not going to get 7, 8, 9, 10 teams in the tournament, not even close. But it's just interesting to note. It's interesting to see how you've got this one seed basically in Purdue losing to the worst team in the Big Ten. I mean, you could say when Villanova won the title, when North Carolina won the title. I mean, imagine that team losing to the worst team in the ACC, the worst team in the Big East. I mean, it'd be huge. I mean, you would assume that the best team in the country would not lose to the worst team in its conference, but that's conference play. And in the Big Ten, it's no different.
That's traveling in the Big Ten, youngster. That's what I'm saying. You can go to a Rutgers and struggle. Anywhere in the Big Ten. When you go, and it's the same in most conferences. When you go on the road, everything's out of whack. And I'll even use when I coached college soccer. I mean, you got the travel, you've got meals, you've got all kinds of things that have to be taken care of, and you're out of routine. But that's, to be honest, that's what I'm saying. There is no easy game when you go on the road. Now, at home, that game might have been a little bit different for Purdue, but like you said, Rutgers was right there. Rutgers was right there to knock off the Giants, and they almost did it.
Yeah, I was very surprised. I was actually watching that game in the background for a while, and then I saw, Purdue was obviously pulling away like they should have. And then I noticed that Rutgers was making it very interesting late in the second half. And it's like, really? This is where Purdue's at? They keep winning. So again, 12-0 in conference, 23-2 overall, 19 straight wins. It's great, but it's interesting leading up to this week. Hosting Ohio State on Wednesday, traveling to Michigan State on Saturday. It's going to be huge. That game against Ohio State's on the Big Ten Network. I don't know why that's not nationally televised. The one on Saturday at Michigan State, that's going to be on ESPN. Definitely two games to look for. If you're not doing anything Wednesday night, that's something to keep an eye on. And then Saturday, absolutely, Purdue at Michigan State. That's, potential national championship type stuff, let alone, Big Ten final, top two teams in the Big Ten, arguably. But, yeah, so interesting week ahead for Purdue. Even against Maryland, though, I want to backtrack a little bit. Maryland shot 45% from the field, 30% from three. It's not as though Maryland had this great game, kept it close with Purdue, and then against Rutgers, again, Rutgers scored 49 points in the second half against Purdue to barely lose by 2 points. Rutgers out-rebounded Purdue 37-25. Purdue is huge. Purdue has a backup big who's 7'3". They have Isaac Haas, who's 7'2". I don't know. Rutgers' leading rebounder going into this game was 6'7". How Rutgers out-rebounds Purdue by 12 is beyond me. Again,
hustle and will. Hustle and will, youngster. That's all it is. And again, I've said it many times. Purdue travels to Rutgers. Purdue has won 18 in a row, ranked third in the country. There could be that little all we got to do is show up and play. It's Rutgers. Right. Well, Rutgers, to them, that was their NCAA championship game right there.
Yeah.
They wanted that game. And that's how they out-rebound them, youngster. It's very simple. They willed it. They wanted it more. And it took Purdue, basically, I guess, about 36 minutes to figure it out? I mean, Rutgers wasn't going away. They gave them a game. And that's all it is. You play that game again. This is one of those games, youngster. You play that game 100 times, and maybe 95 times Purdue wins by double digits. But on that given night, Rutgers wanted it. They wanted the ball. They were going to hustle after every loose one, and they went out to play. Hats off to Rutgers. I know there's no moral victories because they don't count in the win column. But, man, Rutgers sure scared Purdue a little bit. That's all I got.
Rutgers has a little bit of talent. I noted it in our little preseason college basketball show a couple months ago. If you go to thegruelingtruth.net and you listen to that show, I kind of had the teams in tiers. Troy had the teams in tiers and expected Rutgers to be on the bottom probably. But they had some talent, and Corey Sanders is talented. They brought in a freshman who's 17 years old, reclassified up a year as a 4-star recruit. Rutgers has some talent on this team. They beat Wisconsin earlier, not that Wisconsin's a juggernaut, obviously, but Rutgers has a couple wins. They pushed Purdue to the brink, scored 49 points in the second half, out-rebounded them by double digits. It's just, I think Rutgers, they also beat a ranked Seton Hall team earlier this year, which we talked about on the show a couple months ago. It's like, is Rutgers kind of on the come up? And I don't think they're even close to the middle of the pack for the Big Ten, but I think the gap is absolutely narrowing. I think Rutgers is getting better at basketball. They have a second-year head coach. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Steve Picciol, something like that. In any case, I think he's making the program better. I'll say that much. Purdue sliding a little bit. Wednesday, they play Ohio State. Saturday, play Michigan State. If Purdue keeps rolling, I mean, we're going to talk about them next week. That's for sure. But these next two games for them going to be very interesting. After that, they get Penn State at home. That's their toughest game to close out the regular season. Otherwise, they play Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. So Purdue gets past this week. They should go 16-0 in the Big Ten. But at Michigan State, absolutely going to be tough. And home against Ohio State going to be very interesting to me. I would assume Purdue wins that game somewhat comfortably and puts Ohio State in their place. That's my opinion. But in any case, Purdue basketball is going to be interesting to watch this coming week. One thing I wanted to note too, Troy, before we move into kind of the middle tier, Michigan State on a 6-game winning streak. So 22-3 overall, have kind of answered our questions, at least, as to all these distractions with the Larry Nassar scandal and Tom Izzo being feeling guilty about thinking about talking about basketball. Kind of weird, and just it's odd. You know, a lot of different stuff happening in Michigan State. They're reeling off wins now, beating teams that they should, maybe getting their act together. But they played Indiana on, what was it, Saturday, I think it was. But regardless of the day, beat Indiana by 3 points. You would assume they would do better. Shot 50% from three, 48% from the field. They should have won that game by more, probably. Got outscored in the second half. Their leading scorer was Matt McQuaid off the bench with 12 points. Did not have a great showing. But also, again, one thing I wanted to note, this game at Indiana, Michigan State is the number one rebounding team in college basketball. In terms of rebounding differential, Michigan State had 29 rebounds in this game. Indiana had 53. Indiana, who's known for their quickness and guards and not having great bigs, 53-29 out-rebounded the number one rebounding team in the country. Out-rebounded them by 24. Again, goes to show hustle, home court in the Big Ten. It's Indiana. They're going to be loud. They're going to care. You're going to get the best from Indiana to beat a top-ranked, basically, Michigan State team. Again, just goes to show even the middle of this conference, the bottom of this conference, they can push the juggernauts who really have a chance to win the whole thing, even on the glass, where those teams typically dominate. Just goes to speak to the Big Ten, whether they get 5 teams in the tournament or 7 or 8. I respect what teams in this conference can do on a nightly basis. I guess that's my only point with that.
Well, once again, youngster, another game on the road. And Indiana literally fighting for their lives.
Yeah.
Because they've been on a downward spiral. That was a game that they needed to have. That would have been a huge win for Indiana.
Yeah.
And again, no moral victories. That loss puts them at 5-7 in the Big Ten now.
Yeah, 12 and 12
fighting.
overall.
Yeah, fighting now. I mean, literally really put them behind the 8 ball with no chalk for their cue stick. I mean, that's where they're at. That's where they're at right now with that loss. They needed that. So, again, it goes to show when you are mentally prepared and you want something bad enough, you can go out and compete. And, again, it's in the Big Ten. You just talked about it. Now, I'm not saying that the Big Ten is the best conference in the country because people will argue, well, just look at the records and look at the teams. Well, the competitive nature, and I've said it for 2 weeks, the guys after 5, 6, and down, they just beat each other up. And then every once in a while, you're going to get a team like an Indiana or a Rutgers when they're playing at home and they're playing so loose. They have nothing to lose. They could defeat one of the top teams in the conference. So to me, it's a very good conference, but anybody outside of a Big Ten fan is going to think, man, the Big Ten sucks this year. Look at all the records. That's because 6 and down, very evenly matched. And we're waiting. We're waiting for Penn State. We're waiting for Northwestern. We're waiting for Maryland. And Indiana, I guess, like you said, you can throw them in there to separate. But there's not much time left to separate. Nebraska, Michigan already have done it. They've moved in. They've started that second tier. And I think Ohio State's going to fall into that second tier after their upcoming schedule. So then you got Purdue, Michigan State, then you'll have Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, and we'll see if one of those 4 teams we just talked about can vault into that middle tier. But they have to do it. The problem is you got all those teams that will be in that bottom tier. They're not giving up. They're not waving white flags. They're going to go play hard. So if you got to travel to their house, you might be in for a loss. And that's what I'm seeing in the Big Ten. But anybody outside of that doesn't follow the Big Ten every night, they're just going to look at records and say, man, the Big Ten sucks, which I disagree with. I mean, talent level, there's some talent. Could there be more? Yes. I don't think they're a dominant conference, but they've got good teams. And the problem is they're average to maybe a bit above average. And what that's spelling, and I've said it over and over, spells disaster for the number of teams that are going to get into the NCAA tournament from the Big Ten. That's all I got, youngster.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly. I think for those who maybe started picking up on our show, we started the show basically a year ago, over a year ago now, but started with basketball talk, and we talked about how kind of a down year it was a year ago in the Big Ten. And then some teams got hot, and it's like, hey, we've got 3 or 4 really interesting teams going into March Madness, and then they basically all made the Sweet 16 outside of Minnesota, who lost a guy. But there were some interesting teams toward the end, but overall a down year in the Big Ten a year ago. Then we transitioned to football, Big Ten football, and I have been saying Big Ten conference in football is the best conference in college football. You can have Alabama and Georgia, who are juggernauts now, but the rest of the SEC compared to the Big Ten, 3 through 7, 8, the bottom of any conference is going to be poor. That's just the bottom of any conference. But the middle and obviously the top with teams like Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin seems to be basically a top 10 team. As of recent history, nearly every year, I just, as a whole, we're not bashing the Big Ten just because we say, hey, it's a down year in the Big Ten for basketball, or I'm not this huge Big Ten supporter when it comes to football, and it's like, oh, yeah, the Big Ten's the best conference in college football this year and last year and for the last 5 years. I don't sugarcoat things. I just say it how it is, and I'm with you 100%, Troy, that this year in college basketball, the Big Ten's pretty average, but at the top you've got a couple teams who can win the whole thing. So if you want to call them above average, you think teams like Nebraska, Michigan, your Penn States can go out and beat any team out there, Maryland, Northwestern, if they put it all together. There are some quality basketball teams as well as some juggernauts. So I think Big Ten basketball is better than it was a year ago. But the middle of the conference, I think this year, somewhat weak. And I think the middle of the conference a year ago kind of stepped up at this time and said, hey, we can go out and beat number 1 overall seed Villanova. Hey, we can go out and push number 1 overall or number 1 seed Kansas. We can get to the Sweet 16. We can get to the Elite Eight. There were some interesting teams a year ago, and there obviously are a couple this year, but the middle of the Big Ten, something we're going to talk about now till basically the end of the show this week. I wanted to start with Nebraska, though. Nebraska, this is how I wanted to start it, was, okay, they're 5th, and we can say they're in that next tier, but they are 8-4. They're 17-8 overall. They're not 19-6 overall like Michigan. They're not obviously going to get in, but they've won 3 straight. They're at 8 wins already. You've got 6 more games to play. You get 10. Even if they go 2-4 in the last 6, you can say they get to 10-8. But even at that point, 19-12 overall. And then if they have a poor showing in the Big Ten tournament and people think the Big Ten's down and it's not a great conference, then, hey, maybe Nebraska misses. So I wanted to take a little more of a look at Nebraska before getting into the real meat of the middle. And just to give fans an idea here, Nebraska's schedule going forward, at Minnesota, they should win that game. Rutgers at home, they should win that game. Maryland at home, that's kind of a tough one, but it is at home. Illinois on the road, again, probably should win that game. Indiana at home, probably should win that game. There's a lot of toss-ups, so to say, but Nebraska's a solid team. These other teams have not been playing solid basketball this year. And then at the end, they host Penn State. So you've got 4 of your last 6 at home. You're not playing any of the juggernauts. Nebraska should get at least 2-3 wins, barring a collapse in the Big Ten tournament.
Let me put it this way, youngster. If they only get 2 or 3 wins out of that remaining schedule, then I'm gonna pencil them back out of the NCAA tournament because they're not a tournament team then. Because you mentioned like a Maryland, okay, that's a solid team.
Yeah.
But if they want to be a tournament team, I look at the remaining 6, they should go 5-1. And if they go 4-2, okay, you can slip up twice. But if they only go 3-3, I don't think they deserve to be in even with 11 Big Ten wins. I really don't. Because this remaining schedule is so easy. I mean, okay, you got Penn State. That could be a tough one. Like you said, Maryland, maybe Indiana because Indiana's in desperation mode. So, okay, 3-3, maybe you could convince me that they should still be in because it would give them 11 Big Ten wins. But if they go 2-4, Kevin, the 10 Big Ten, that number we talked about, 10 Big Ten wins, nah, keep them out. If they go 2-4, nah, I'm not on board then. 3-3, I'm still not on board, but you could probably convince me. They need to go 4-2 or 5-1. I'm sorry. That's what they have to do. And they can, because their remaining 6 are all winnable. That's all I got.
No, yeah, I think this is going to be interesting to see what they do in the Big Ten tournament because I don't think they go 5-1. I think they do slip up a couple times, and if they go, I guess if they go 4-2, I mean you're 12-6 in conference, they're in. But if they do go 3-3, which I think is possible, I think a slip up somewhere at Minnesota and they lose to a Penn State, a Maryland, I think that's very possible for Nebraska. I'm not sold on Nebraska being this, yes, definite 8 seed in the tournament type team. I'm just not sold yet. I need to see they had a 20-point win against Michigan. Okay, that's obviously impressive, and they have basically not had a bad loss this year. I think they're a solid team. I just am wanting to see more, I guess. Maybe that's me not watching every single Nebraska game. Maybe that's it. But maybe it's also just, like I said to start this show, it's Nebraska basketball. I don't remember ever them being in the top 25 in my lifetime. I don't remember them ever in my lifetime being in the NCAA tournament. Maybe they have. I just don't remember. But Nebraska basketball has basically been a laughingstock, to be honest. So to see them be solid and have to go to Minnesota, who I know has at least as much talent, they've just been playing poorly this year, have a guy out to injury, have had a suspension. I know Minnesota is capable of beating Nebraska at Minnesota. I know they're capable of it. Maryland, I know, has probably more talent than Nebraska does. Penn State, they have at least as much talent as Nebraska does. Nebraska is luckily at home. in that game. But Illinois can score as well. They have to go to Illinois. They should, if you are a tournament team. I agree with you, Troy. Go 5-1. I just don't think they're going to. I don't even necessarily think they're going to go 4-2. I think 3-3. You end up 20-11 overall. That's solid. 11-7 in the Big Ten. That's typically automatic. You're in. But if they are a 5 seed going into the Big Ten tournament, they miss out on that double bye. They get one bye. And then you're playing an 11 seed in the first round. Say they win that game. But then in round 2, so that's not really an impressive win at all. Then round 2, you have to play a 4 seed. And so, or I guess technically round 3, it would be their second game. They play Michigan. And if Michigan beats them by 10, that's what? You basically did nothing in the Big Ten tournament. You finished 3-3 against poor competition. You're 20-11 overall. Now, post-Big Ten tournament, you're 21-12. Do you really deserve it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And you look at recent wins.
I gave you my answer.
Right.
I gave you my answer at 3-3. I'm saying no.
No.
They would have to have a signature win in the Big Ten tournament. If they go 3-3 over their last 6, they will have to get by that first round, which is no gimme. Really, it's not. And then they have to win their second game, which is the third round. That would have to be that signature win if they go 3-3. So if they go 3-3, they're going to be on the outside looking in my mind, if they don't advance in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's just something that needed to be brought up because, it's like Nebraska's solid now, and they're looking good, 8-4, should be a tournament team, others receiving votes, but I really don't think it's that far-fetched if they miss the tournament. And if they do, and a team like Penn State Northwestern doesn't show up huge in the Big Ten tournament, there might be four Big Ten teams making the NCAA tournament, which is insane to think about.
I'll go back, youngster, because in the beginning of the show I talked about Nebraska, and I think they can get in. But again, you mentioned they have to prove it. Yes, they've got to prove it, but when I look at their schedule, the last 6 games, if they are a tournament team, we're talking 3-3, and then I'm not on board. And I'm not going to waver from that, but I believe that if they've been playing good basketball, to go 4-2, that's not asking the world.
Right.
You can slip up to a Penn State or a Maryland, and you can even maybe go to Minnesota and lose, which, people say, oh, my God, you lost to Minnesota. But like you said, Minnesota's a good team. But let's say it like it is. They've been pooing the bed. Like they pooed the bed once, then you think they'd learn their lesson. No, they pooed again. They're just not – it's not clicking to them with the talent that they have. So wouldn't it be amazing if all of a sudden in their last 6 games it clicks, and then all of a sudden they look like the team we thought they'd be that would be in the middle tier, and they rattle off 4 wins themselves, which could very well happen. It could. Minnesota is that talented. When I look at 3-9, what a disappointment. Comparative to their counterpart at 3-9 Wisconsin, once the injuries happened, I told you this, they're done. I knew it. And I even said in the preview show, Wisconsin, probably going to miss the tournament for the first time in a billion years. Because I just wasn't sold. Where's the scoring going to come from? Even when they were healthy. 3-9, I didn't expect 3-9. But once they had all the injuries, then I knew they were done. But Minnesota is sitting there with a lot of talent on that court where they can go out and they can beat these middle-tier teams. So they better not be sleeping if they have to go to Minnesota or play Minnesota at home, because they can take care of business if they catch one of those teams or they put it all together. Carry on, youngster.
Yeah, so Nebraska's won 3 straight. Most people think they're in. I think they're going to get in as well, but I think it's very possible that they don't. But to move into truly the middle of this Big Ten, Penn State 6-6, Northwestern 5-6, Maryland 5-7, Indiana 5-7, and then you get 3-9 Minnesota and worse. So really the thick of things in the middle of this conference. I don't know if any of these teams are going to make it, but we're going to talk a little more in depth, again, just like we did about Nebraska, to start with Penn State. 16-9 overall, that's not too bad. It's not great. but it's not 500, which like Indiana we're going to talk about a little bit, they're 500. That's dangerous. So Penn State in conference, 6-6. They're 6th in the conference. In their last 4, they've won 3 games. Only loss was at Michigan State when they lost by 8. But to go forward, and I mentioned this a week ago, that they probably go 1-1 this week. And this week, a week ago being last week, because they played at Michigan State, I figured they'd lose. And then they played Iowa. I figured they'd win. They won by 24 points. Understandable. Completely understand that week of basketball. But going forward, again, you're still at 6-6. You need to start racking up wins. And their schedule going forward, they play Maryland at home. That's okay. You can see a win there, but it's still Maryland. It's going to be tough. And then they travel to Illinois. They should win. It's not automatic, but they should win. And then to close, you get Ohio State at home, tough. You go at Purdue, very tough. Then you host Michigan, tough. Then you travel to Nebraska, who's also fighting for their lives. That's going to be tough. This schedule going forward for Penn State is tough. And they won at Ohio State a couple weeks ago. That was huge. If they can pull off a big win like that against Ohio State, against Purdue, against Michigan, at Nebraska even to end the year, that'd be big. But if they go 4-2 with this schedule, I think that's impressive. Like, they'd have to pull off a top 25 win, and then they'd basically have to beat Maryland, Illinois, and Nebraska. If they do that, and you're 20-11 and you're 10-8 with some impressive victories, that's interesting. That to me is more, and I can see, I trust Penn State more than I trust Nebraska, even though Penn State's a couple games worse in conference. I still trust Penn State now as they're healthy, fully, 100% more than I trust Nebraska. So I really want this Penn State team to get in. We talked about it before the year started. This is our dark horse, but the road in front of them, a little tough with Maryland, Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan, and then at Nebraska to close. That's tough. And even at Illinois can put up 80 points on most teams. That's not automatic either. So going to be interesting to see Penn State basketball going forward. It's, again, one of the teams that I'm honestly rooting for. I want them to get in the tournament, but if they go 3-3 and you're sitting at 9-9, that's trouble. 19-12 overall, 9-9 in the Big Ten. You've got to do some real damage in the Big Ten tournament, which, again, it's going to be hard when you've got a couple absolute juggernauts in there, and then Ohio State playing really well. Michigan's a dangerous team. Nebraska's solid. It's going to be tough at that point. If they go 3-3 the rest of the way, which I think is very possible, it's an uphill climb for Penn State, which sucks, to be honest. But that's my diagnosis for Penn State going forward.
Well, youngster, you can actually say it could possibly be 25 wins because Nebraska's the last game of the year. If Nebraska rolls off 4 more wins, they're going to get in the top 25. They're going to eventually sneak in at 23 or so like that. So Penn State will have 2 top 25 wins, which would be good. It would help their resume. But like you said, if they only go 3-3 and they're sitting at 9-9 and 19, what would they be? 19-12 overall? Is that what they'd be?
Yep.
They would have to go 2-1 in the Big Ten tournament to get to 21 wins, and that might not even be enough, depending on what happens around the country.
Right.
So they would have to, if they go 4-2, like you said, that is like asking to sit down and eat cookies with Santa Claus. That it's nearly impossible, because you look at the schedule that they have. They got Ohio State. They got Michigan, because Michigan is a team that nobody's talking about, Kevin. I'm not saying that they're in the upper echelon of the Big Ten. They're just sitting there. They're just sitting there in 4th place, just playing basketball. That's all they're doing. It looks like they're having fun. They're kind of taking this in stride, like, nobody's talking about us. We'll just go out and win basketball games and sit here, and we'll show you when we get to the tournament again. Kind of like last year.
Yep.
And they're on like a mirror image. But for Penn State, if they went 4-2, I would almost at that point, it wouldn't be a permanent marker, but I would put them in with one of those erasable pens, Because with their remaining schedule, going 4-2, and then if they could ring off 2 more wins in the Big Ten tournament, then you'd have to put them in. But at 4-2, that would put them at 10-8, and that's what we talked about a couple weeks ago. 10 wins normally a few years back in the Big Ten, automatic. Not anymore after last year. Iowa left out with 10 wins. You got to get to that 11-mark plateau now. And so if they went 10-8, that's still going 4-2, but you would probably have 2 top 25 wins in there. And then if they could continue that in the Big Ten tournament and win 2 more, then I think you have to put them in. But it's going to be tough. They've put themselves in a situation where it's go time. And you better bring your A game, and you better bring that veteran leadership, because your schedule here on out, pretty darn tough. That's all I got on Penn State, youngster.
Yeah, and their schedule, even to this point, has not been that insanely easy. Hence the 6-6 record right now. They're record-wise a pretty average team. They're above average, but they were missing one of their key guys for a few games there, which definitely hurt them. But this is a tournament-level team. They really are. If you sit there and you watch them, they are one of the best 68 teams in the country, no doubt about it. But schedule-wise, what they did to themselves earlier in the year, not playing up to their potential, it could hurt them. And again, an injury that cost them a few games in the middle, it does not help. But Big Ten tournament going to be huge for all of these middle teams we're talking about. Next on the list, though, is Northwestern. Northwestern is, 14-10 overall. Not too good. 5-6 in the Big Ten, certainly not too good. They've got 7 games remaining, and their schedule not all that easy either. You play Michigan this week. You travel to play Maryland this week. This week's going to be huge. I mean, if they lose both of those games, they're cooked. They're done. But if they can pull one of those, that certainly helps, but that still gets you to just 6-7, and then they play Rutgers, they play Wisconsin, they play Maryland, but again, they also play Michigan State and Maryland. So not an easy schedule going forward for Northwestern. If they were to go 4-3 in there, you're 9-9 in conference, you're 18-13 overall, you'd have to at least get to the Big Ten final, in my opinion. Northwestern, they're in really deep crap. I said it a week ago, I would expect this team to not make it. And losing at Michigan was huge this past week. They were up on Michigan early. They were up a little big, actually, but in the second half, they were atrocious. Ended up scoring 47 points in that game. They could have stole that one. That would have been huge. Would have made them 6-5 in conference. That was big. They host Michigan on Tuesday. That's going to be huge. Again, this week for Northwestern is enormous. Hosting Michigan, traveling to Maryland, you better win at least one of them. But even still, to go 1-1, you're asking for a lot for this Northwestern team, and the schedule is not Cupcake City where they should win 4, 5, 6 games going forward. I would expect something around 4-3 in their last 7, and again, that gets you to 9-9. You've got to do a lot of damage in the Big Ten tournament if you're Northwestern to make it for the second year in program history and the second year in a row.
Tough road.
Yep.
Another team that has not met expectations, and I talked a little about it in the beginning of the show. I think they thought it was going to come easy after last year. You know, they figured, hey, we're returning the core of our team. We were a tournament team last year. We'll just go out and play. Well, you got to prepare, and you got to be ready to play. And honestly, Kevin, I'm looking at their schedule. I don't think they make it. They're 5-7 right now. I just mentioned, 10 minutes ago? You got to win 11. If you got to win 11, that means they got to go 6-0. They're not going 6-0.
Yeah, they've got 7 games left, but I mean, still 5-2, okay, hopefully at best.
Yeah, it's not happening. They're 5-6.
Yeah.
So if they go 5-2, that puts them at 10-8. And then record-wise,
19-12.
Yeah, they're not even at the 20 mark.
Right.
You mentioned it. They've got to do damage in the tournament. So they need to use here's really what Northwestern has to do. They've got to use these last 6 games, not worry about the wins and losses, but they've got to prepare and get ready and be fine-tuned for the tournament to try and win the Big Ten tournament or go deep. You mentioned getting to the final. If they got to the final, that might do it. That might, as long as they don't go 2-5, that would be terrible. But if they went 4-3 and got them to that 9-9 mark and then made a run to the final, that would be impressive to get them in. That would probably get them in at 9-9. But anything below, if they go 8-10, then they almost have to win the Big Ten tournament.
Yep.
Because under 500 in the Big Ten, it's nearly impossible. Nearly impossible at that point. And I guess I'm just disappointed in Northwestern. I thought this was a team, like most people, returning that core leaders, that they would be making a run to the NCAA tournament. Now they have to make a run just to get on the bubble. They really went out and they really disappointed in the first part of that conference schedule and probably lost some games they shouldn't have lost. But it's going to be a tough road for them. Let's move on.
Yeah, and even lately, last thing, 5-6 in the last 11 games. So they're not even playing fantastic as of late. They've won 3 of the last 4, but again, 5-6 in the last 11. It's so different when there's nothing expected of you, and you know you have a good team, and you know you can prove everyone wrong, and you know you can be that Cinderella story going into March Madness. First time in program history your school gets there. That's one thing. It's another when expectations are, hey, you were like an 8 or a 9 seed a year ago, weren't you? Now you return basically everyone. You should be, 6 seed, 5 seed, maybe a 7. So it's a world of difference in terms of how you prepare, how thirsty you are for getting to March Madness, for returning there, as opposed to the first time in school history to be that unbelievable team that everyone's going to remember as an alumni or a Northwestern fan. It's so different psychologically, and I think you put it best that this team, I don't know if they're lazy, but this team does not have the same edge or oomph or, they're not the same team that they were a year ago mentally. Physically, the players they have, absolutely the same team, but mentally nowhere close. 5-6 in their last 11 games speaks to that. So to move on to the next team on the list is Maryland. Maryland's a little more impressive in terms of overall record, 16-9, just like Penn State, but they've dropped an extra game. They're 5-7. So Maryland, a team talent-wise, should be a top 68 team, but Big Ten-wise, again, this is another team, 3-6 in the last 9. They've beaten Wisconsin, they've beaten Minnesota, they've beaten Iowa. Otherwise, they've lost in their last 9 games. So not impressive stuff. Going forward, at Penn State, at Nebraska, at Northwestern, you have to play Michigan. Not at Northwestern. At Penn State, at Nebraska. They do. They play Northwestern twice. There are some tough games in there. Their only quote-unquote easy one is Rutgers at home. Okay, that's a win, but that's not even an automatic win if you ask Purdue. But so Maryland at Penn State, then you play at Northwestern, you get Northwestern at home. At Nebraska, you get Michigan at home to close the year. It's not easy going forward. And so out of these 6 games, even if they go 4-2, they're 9-9 in conference. So you got to win at least 2 games in the Big Ten tournament, probably 3, if not more, and get to the final. If you're 9-9, you should probably have to get to the final of the Big Ten tournament. If they go 4-2 these last 6, it's kind of impressive. But again, there's still only one ranked team on the schedule. Maryland's in deep crap, just like a lot of these teams in the middle of the conference. That's somewhat been the theme of our show for the last few weeks, is that the middle of this conference has to do work to get in the NCAA tournament, and Nebraska has separated themselves from the rest of the middle for now. But Maryland, again, 3-6 in the last 9 games, and the schedule going forward is not Cupcake City either. Outside of Rutgers, your easiest game is, Northwestern at home, I guess? And Northwestern's fighting for their lives and has a team as talented as Maryland probably. So tough road ahead for Maryland, especially at 5-7 in the Big Ten. Not looking good for the Terps, but at this point, I wouldn't expect them to get in either, which is sad considering talent-wise, this should be a tournament team.
Yeah, somebody put some sugar in their gas tank there, youngster. They're not moving along. This is a team I thought was going to be a little bit better. I mentioned it in our show, our preview show, that I thought they'd be a better team without Tremble, and now they're proving me wrong, which happens a lot. The old man's wrong a lot. But when you look at it, you mentioned they're impressive with 19 victories. What did they do in the Cupcake City games? They had Butler in New Mexico. And then they played somebody, I think, called Maryland Eastern Shore. Yeah, there's a big win. Jackson State. I'm just going by memory now when I looked at the schedule before. But, yeah, they're 19 wins. But when you look at their non-conference, it's not impressive. Maybe the Butler win. Okay, that's 1. But now you look at your conference record. They've got a ton of work to do. And, Kevin, I could see this team right now going 2-4 in their last 6, and being 7-11 in conference very easily. It's not an easy schedule here at the end, and like I said, they've kind of just stalled. They were playing okay. I wouldn't categorize it as great because, like you said, 3-6 in their last 9, but they were playing okay. But this is a team I don't think is going to make it. Just where they're at, where they've been in their last couple of games, remaining schedule, I mean, it would be a miracle. And, again, miracles happen. Don't get me wrong. But Maryland's got a tough road. Maybe the toughest of these teams that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And it's just you look at where they're at. You've already put yourself way behind an 8 ball at 5-7. And the way the conference is rolling out, 9-9 is not going to do it. 10-8 may not do it. But here's the thing: you look at the committee, and it's human. If they went 10-8, Kevin, that would give them what they would then go 4-1 in their last. 4-2. Where are they at now in the conference? I'm sorry, I'm the old man memory just went out of my brain.
No, it's all good. They're 5-7 in conference. They'd have to go to get to 10 wins. They'd have to go 5-1.
So if they went 5-1, I mean they'd probably get in.
Yeah,
10 wins. 9-9 is not going to get them in. But if they go 5-1, they would then have 24 regular season wins. You almost can't keep them out then, even though their cupcake schedule in the non-conference was just that. That was like a double sugary cupcake, for sure. I mean, they didn't play anybody. But, you look at it, and Maryland, I don't think makes it. I don't even think they do much in the tournament. I'm just not been impressed with Maryland over the last couple of games, and it's not even the last couple, like you said. Their last 10, not impressive at all. So if the last team I guess we're going to talk about is Indiana, who already have out. I mean, there's no way Indiana gets in unless they win the Big Ten tournament, Kevin. They're 500. Their overall record's 500. They have to win the Big Ten. They literally would have to win out in the Big Ten regular season conference schedule and then even do more damage in the tournament to get in because their overall record is at 500. So I've already counted Indiana out, but you can talk about them if you want.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention with Maryland, their core 3 coming back were all sophomores because a year ago they were Mello, Trimble, and 3 talented freshmen. Now you lose Trimble, and then you have 3 core sophomores going into this year. Now Justin Jackson played up until December, out for the year with an injury. So now you're down to big 2 sophomores. That's tough. Michigan State has 4 big sophomores and a top 10 freshman recruit, and depth and size.
And it's not a coincidence. I hate to interrupt you, youngster. It's not a coincidence that all of a sudden their poor play started after that injury. I mean,
right.
you lost a key component to your team.
Yep.
So, again, you lose that guy. Now you got 2 guys trying to carry a team. And really, to be honest, to be a dominant team, you need to have 3 go-to guys. Those that listen in all the time know I'm a Badger fan, and I grew up in Wisconsin. And you look at those runs that they made, Kevin, they had 3 guys that could get the job done. You had Decker, you had Nigel Hayes, you had Kaminsky. You had a big 3. You've got to have 3. 2, you can pull off some wins, but to be dominant and string together a lot of wins and be a great team, you got to have 3 bigs, or not necessarily bigs, but 3 big-time players. Can be a guard and 2 forwards, a center, a forward, and a guard. I don't care. But you need to have 3. 3 guys that can step up, and 3 guys where any of those 3 can get the ball when you need a shot. And Maryland just doesn't have it now. They're down to 2, like you said. So that's a great point, youngster.
Yeah, just a reason for why they've been kind of behind the 8 ball all year long. To move on to Indiana, and this is what's interesting about Indiana to me, and I lump them in this middle core because a couple weeks ago they were up toward number 5, I believe, in the conference. They've lost 4 in a row, so they were 5-3 in conference at one point. Just counting out their overall record, this team was interesting. And then they lost 4 straight, and now they're 12-12, and they're 5-7 in the Big Ten. But going forward, you play Rutgers, you play Minnesota, you play Illinois, you play Iowa. Then you have to play at Nebraska, which again could be a top 25 team. If Indiana's fighting for the lives at that point, and you're winners of 4 straight, then that game's interesting. Indiana can beat Nebraska. I don't think that's absolutely insane. And then the last game would be at home against Ohio State, another top 25 potential win at home. And you have to get every win possible if you're Indiana. They'd be insanely loud at Indiana. I don't think that's absurd to think that they could knock off Ohio State. I think that if they went 5-1 and they beat Rutgers, Minnesota, in Illinois, and Iowa, and they can knock off a Nebraska or Ohio State, that gets them to 10-8. That's why I think they're interesting. But overall-wise, and this is what hurt Iowa a year ago, overall-wise, at 5-1 the rest of the way, 17-13. That magic number is basically 20 overall wins to get in the tournament to even be considered. Again, unless you win your conference tournament, obviously. But as a bubble team, you need at least 20 wins. 21, you feel a little more comfortable, and then it depends on what you do in conference. But if this team goes 5-1 going forward, and you're 10-8 in the Big Ten, and then you can get to the third round, the semis, you pick up a top 25 win in the Big Ten tournament, I don't think it's impossible for this team to make it. I don't think you have to win the Big Ten tournament, but they need to basically literally win out going forward. If they go 6-0 and you're 11-8 or 11-7 in Big Ten play, that's certainly interesting. You'd have to look, you'd have to go back and see, okay, what makes this team poor overall? You had to play at Seton Hall, you had to play Duke. You had to play some difficult teams, Notre Dame when they were healthy. So Indiana, to me, I mean, I don't think they're 100% out unless they win the Big Ten tournament, but you basically have to win out. It's just interesting to me, this team, because of what they were and their schedule going forward is very easy. If you can consider it easy, this team has the easiest schedule probably in the entire Big Ten going forward. So all winnable games, in my opinion. But being 12-12 overall is probably what's going to kill this team.
Yeah, but when you look at comparison to what Maryland did in the non-conference and you look at what Indiana did, Indiana had some of those games. Like you said, a Notre Dame, a Seton Hall. I know Louisville's on a downslide, but still at Louisville. They played Duke. I mean, they played some good non-conference teams.
Yep.
So their strength of schedule outside of the conference is much better than Maryland. But the thing is, they're still 12-12. And there's no way to sugarcoat that. You're 12-12. Now, and Kevin, going 6-0, that's not impossible. But again, if we go back to my theme, any of those teams that you mentioned could knock an Indiana off. And if they have one blemish on their record, they're done. Yeah. They literally have to go 6-0 in my mind. 5-1, I mean, yeah, maybe, but 5-1, like you said, only puts you at 17 wins.
Yeah.
You then got to win 3 games in the Big Ten tournament.
At least.
Could it be done? Yeah, it could be done to get to 20. Could be. But that's why I'm counting them out. I mean, 5-1, and then you got to beat Ohio State and Nebraska. I mean, they could. They could. And let's put it this way. I've seen Indiana play good basketball.
Yeah.
But can they do it for 6 straight games? That's tough. In the Big Ten, it's tough. And you got to go on the road in these finals. You're not playing all 6 at home. So that's why I've counted them out. So prove me wrong, Indiana. Go ahead and prove me wrong. Prove the old man wrong if you want to, but I think you're done. All right, youngster, I think we've pretty much wrapped it up. What last words do you have for the listeners today?
Last thing for me is just to pound on Indiana. You look at their recent losses at Michigan State, against Michigan State at home, at Ohio State, against Purdue. It's tough. I mean, this whole schedule for Indiana is tough. Obviously, you're going to have cupcakes in there somewhere in a 30-game schedule, but even conference-wise, to have to play Michigan State twice, Ohio State twice, Purdue, it's just it was tough this year for Indiana. You have to play Michigan. It's just this whole schedule. I mean, this had to be a pretty good team to end up with a good record at the end of it, and Indiana's not there yet. It's the first year under Archie Miller, and to have this schedule, I mean, if they pulled off 10 conference wins and they get close to 20 wins, I think that's impressive. And I think most people surrounding Indiana's program might say, my God, we only went, what would it be, 18-14, something like that. That's crap. What did Archie Miller do this year? But in general, just look at the schedule. I mean, don't watch a game, just look at the schedule. And you can see why this team went 18-14, why they went, 10-8 in conference. They weren't impressive. I could see it happening that way. And I guess want to be on the supporting bandwagon of Archie Miller. I think this program will rise again. I don't think they're going to be a superpower under Archie Miller, but I think they will be good. But this year, don't look at their overall record, in my opinion. Even in conference, their schedule has been tough.
It has been very tough. Nobody gave the scheduling committee any sweets. No favors there. None whatsoever when they had to play this schedule. But another show in the books, youngster. I hope all the listeners enjoyed it today. Find us on Twitter at TroyRobert967 is my spot. I can't even talk now. Got me all going worked up here at the end, youngster. I am TroyRobert967. The youngster is at KidCunny, KIDCUNI, and our show handle to find all of our shows at Youngster Old Man, all one word. Thanks for listening in. We'll talk with you next week. Have a good night, everyone.